for this writing exercise.
The recording.
Need an extra copy?
No, I started the recording, that's what I was saying.
Yes.
Okay.
All right. So, some basic rules in my world when you're doing this writing exercise, but universal, and I apologize for being so rudimentary, but you only have one page. It's double-sided, so, all right.
Should go to 20.
Should go to 20. All right, so,
Yeah, mine has
all right, so, all right. So, be concise, guys. Verbose doesn't help anyone. I've seen many people write, and they always, or to me, they assume too much knowledge on the part of the writer, or the reader, I should say. They assume too much knowledge on the part of the reader. So make sure that when you're writing something that you frame it so that you bring your reader with you. Okay? I'm big into headings, italics and bold. Now, be forewarned, that doesn't mean when you write something for me or for a client, you should make it into an arts and crafts project. But when things go multiple pages, anything beyond one page in my opinion, you really owe it to your reader, you owe it to yourself to put things into categories and use headings wisely. And I say it is for your reader, but it's also for you, because by doing that kind of breakdown, you force yourself to organize the material. I have seen practitioners write 6-7 page memos, and there's no headings. They just write and write and write. And it becomes very hard to parse through that. So I strongly encourage you that you have to, if you want to make a good paper for me and for your clients, break things down. And again, don't overdo it, but use it in this savvy fashion where you're using your bold, your italics, and the like. I generally, almost without exception, can't stand block quotes, okay? So, if you can, if we have an extra one of these, or at least if a front and a back, that would be great. If we can, try, everyone, like when you see a block quote, guys, who reads block quotes? You guys, as a reader, you just skip the block quote. And I think it's a fair statement to say most of us never ever read block quotes. We just, our eyes just glaze over it, right? Is that a fair statement? Anyone ever read a block quote? I mean, so for your readers and for your clients, shy away from block quotes unless it's extraordinarily important. But I have seen students, I have seen practitioners. They go from one block quote to another block quote to another block quote to another block quote. Your clients are not paying you $400 or $500 an hour to cut and paste and put in block quotes. They want to get your analysis, all right? So a pet peeve of mine is block quotes. You will not get brownie points by me, you will not get brownie points from your client if you use block quotes. No one's impressed that you use block quotes, all right? So in terms of being concise, avoid repetition, guys. You don't, some people believe that if they say it 2 or 3 times, the client will really get it. Well, in my opinion, you haven't said it right the first time if you need to say it 2 or 3 times, all right? And no one likes to be told you're an idiot as a reader. So you're repeating something 2 or 3 times is essentially saying to the reader, you must be pretty obtuse, I have to say this 2 or 3 times. And generally, your reader will not look upon you fondly for treating them like an idiot. So bear that in mind. Get the question right. What is the question the client is really asking? Clients don't know when they have a tax issue what the particular question is. It's up to you to frame it appropriately, all right? So do not answer the wrong question. Do not just, when a client comes in and says he or she or it's a corporate client, has a question and you just say, okay, that's the question I'll answer. It may be the wrong question. It may not be the relevant question. So for our exercise, you guys have to make sure you're asking the right question. If you're not asking the right question, it's a pretty foolish exercise to go down and not get that right, all right? If necessary, point out the questions/issues that you are not resolving. Sometimes it's important to set clients straight and make sure they're under no misimpression that your memo covers everything, the kitchen sink. So sometimes you want to draw that to their attention. Make your paper look aesthetically pleasing, all right? Again, I know this sounds kind of sophomoric, but when you give a paper to someone, a client, you know, it should look good. It should look like you're taking some pride in it. So me personally, I do like full justification. I know some people hate full justification. I just think it's a cleaner product. But you know, just make sure all the font is correct and other things like that. Sometimes, again, it looks sloppy. Even if it's brilliant, but it looks sloppy, the takeaway from clients is that it's sloppy. If it looks really special and it ain't so special, client may still be fooled, so it may still be in good shape. So you might as well start off on the right foot. End your sentences with the most important point. Bring the less important point to the front of your sentence. Okay? That's a common technique. I've trained myself to do this. You don't want to end with the weaker thought at the end of a sentence. You do not end with the weaker thought. You end with the stronger thought. So if you have the income will be taxed as short-term capital gain, if the taxpayer sells the stock before year's end, it's okay, mediocre. But if you take the less important part of the sentence and bring it to the front, if the taxpayer sells the stock before year's end, the income will be taxed as short-term capital gain. It's got more zing to it. It's more of a punctuated kind of sentence. So I've gotten into the habit of doing this. So proofread, proofread, proofread. Remember, spell check can be your best friend or your worst enemy. So just be careful because autocorrect sometimes gets us into silly compromising positions. And you know, if the paper is really important, presumably everyone here works with people or has significant others in their life. If I have a very important project, I am never going to turn that in without someone else reviewing it, because the cliche, a fish doesn't know it's in water. You know, how many times can you read your own work and do you really think you're going to catch your own mistakes? And if the stakes are high enough, you know, you better have someone else review it. Inevitably, it's going to become a better product. If the person is a true colleague, a true significant other, they're going to critique it. They're going to tell you as a reader what they don't follow. So you always need 2 or 3 people, again, if the stakes are really high, to review it. Do not be smug. Do not be arrogant. Do not think whatever you write must be truth with a capital T. does not serve your interest. And cultivate relationships with people, colleagues, or your significant other, where you go back and forth in each, this is a routine where you go through and you critique each other's work. Nothing can be more important. There's typically no reward for getting something to the client too quickly. Let me just tell you, if you guys don't know my personality, particularly in my younger stage of my career, I would pride myself on how quickly I could turn things around. Like, oh, the client called this morning, I gotta get something to the client this afternoon because that will really impress the client. And clients always want things sooner rather than later. But inevitably, if I got it to the client sooner rather than later, the client would not look at it for several days or weeks or months. And they would forget how quickly I got it to the client, but what they would remember if the work product was not up to par. So I have, in my later stages of my career, tried to be far more circumspect and pause and wait. And as much enthusiasm as I still try to bring to the table to make sure that I don't send anything out the same day I write it, unless there's something really, really pressing, because inevitably I've never found anything I've ever written that the next morning I can't make better. All right, so I just, if you're like me, or the me of yesteryear, some of you may race to get things done, but I'm telling you, it's probably not in your interests. It took me a while to learn that. So just share with you, just be careful about getting something, even emails these days, right? The temptation is, let me just check this off my to-do list, let me reply, let me get it done. You know what? Take that email, send it to yourself, craft a response, sleep on it, and then get it out to the client tomorrow. I'm just telling you, dangerous out there. Number 12 is consistent with what, in terms of proofreading, have at least one other person read your work, preferably 2 other people. Item 13, back every legal position with authority. You guys know my mantra, what's your authority? You cannot just simply say things, right? You can, but it's lackluster as a well-supported memorandum. So any legal proposition you should have from case citation, regulatory cite, code section, article, something, why you drew that conclusion. As good as you are, you cannot just act as the authority on it. You have to explain, look, the Supreme Court, if you read a Supreme Court opinion, every other sentence they will cite to authority because the Supreme Court knows it too needs to ground its rationale. Okay. 14. Use authority constructively. Do not supply detailed facts of another case unless absolutely necessary. Where possible, use string cite. So another problem, my younger stage of my career, is that if I found a case or 2 or 3 or 4, I would write memorandums that would extend many, many pages where I would say, here's, this particular case is on point. I would describe the facts of that case. I would describe the issue. I would go through the whole court analysis. And I would say, oh, that was case 1, and case 2 is similar to, and I would write another page or 2 about the second case, and maybe, say a trifecta. Here's the 3rd case, and write a complete analysis. Well, guess what? Jay Solid's 3 or 4 or 5 page analysis of those 3 cases, what I've found is that it's just as effective is to use parentheticals, where I say, see such and Welch v. Halvering, business expenses are deductible if ordinary and necessary. Done. Now, so generally string cites can be very, very effective. Periodically, when you find that gold case, that case which once in a while, when I'm doing an analysis, I find a case that I'm like, wow, this is truly our case, okay? And the client needs to be convinced it's our case. And it's so relevant. In that particular context, you can elaborate on that particular case and it may be worthwhile. So I'm not saying you always have to reduce a case to a string citation. But just like block quotes should be used extraordinarily gingerly, similarly, complete analysis of a case you gotta use, it's a rarity, okay? Once in a while, I stand before you and say, I've done it, but that does not happen too often. You should be extremely careful about copying and pasting. You run the risk of your clients being very annoyed. All right, I have seen this where practitioners have found articles or something that they think are pretty relevant, and what do? They're like, well, I can get away with just copying and pasting practically the whole article, and they do it. And you know what? If your client gets a hold of that, and in this day and age, if they think for some reason it's not your work, but it's some article, and you end up billing, I'm making this up, 2 hours for this memorandum that 90% is cut and paste, you have a big risk, or if your supervisor thinks it's not your work, have a risk of being fired. I mean, so you just have to be careful because sometimes there is temptations about cutting and pasting, and that's not going to play too well with your supervisors or your clients. Use page numbers. Again, I know that sounds foolish, but I can tell you I've seen people hand me memorandums and they're 10 or 15 or 20 pages and there's no page numbers. And for whatever reason, I want to know what page I'm on, or I want to call attention to things. I don't know why you would not use page numbers, okay? So I think that's a good habit. Where possible, eliminate prepositional phrases. So what does that mean? The harshness of these sanctions highlights the importance of this mandate and the prominent role it plays in tax practice. And you can get rid of those prepositional phrases by turning some things into adjectives. The sanctions harshness highlights this mandate's importance and the prominent role it plays in tax practice. So, prepositional phrases are not necessarily evil, but you can make your sentences more powerful periodically by getting rid of them. Yes, notwithstanding what your grade teacher told you, you can begin a sentence with the word but or and. So many of your grade school teachers have told you, I'm sure, never ever begin a sentence with the word but or the word and. Okay, but as you have, notice how I use the word but there. But as you have gotten older and you've matured and become skillful writers, you can, and you'll see it's a very effective technique, depending on the circumstances, to begin sentences with the word but or the word and. So do not shy away in the appropriate circumstances. I truly do it, and I think I can do it fairly well, but I'm not unique. Some of the best writers out there have that ability. When possible, avoid the passive voice. Okay? These reforms were enacted by Congress. Mediocre, but you can zest it up a bit by saying Congress enacted these reforms. Question: what is the most underutilized piece of punctuation found or not found in English prose?
Semicolon.
Semicolon, any other answer? How about a period, okay? People have sentences that run on. Think about, I'm not saying every sentence has to be 6 words or less, but periods can be used effectively, and again, you don't want sentences that drone on and on and on. I do, again, if the stakes are high enough, try reading your paper out loud. I know that you're like, wow, that sounds painful, but if you really want to see what you've written and how it sounds and if it makes sense, you'll be shocked if you start reading something out loud and what your ear comes across. So again, in terms of perfecting your writing skills, you may want to consider that. All right, these are just my 20 tips. I'm sure you guys have your own. Anyone have any thoughts? They say they've learned over the years how to write better, and I'm missing something that you would like to share with the class? Any writing tips? Any pet peeves you guys have? No one's gonna say anything? V, you're gonna say?
Well, I've been previously told that I need to be more pedestrian in my writing, and it's so hard to assume that the reader knows nothing when.
So what you're saying is, when you take your reader, you go to the deep end.
I what?
Quick, in other words, you dive head first as opposed to the Lady Gaga shallow end. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. So, but that's important. You really do have to make sure your reader can tread water before he or she dives off the deep end, right?
But I keep thinking the people who will read our paper know this stuff. So.
Yeah, but everyone, you can't presume knowledge. I mean, for example, people, I'm using code section 189A, for example, which is a brand new section, and you might think, people in this room, qualified business deduction, everyone should have a basic handle, but it's tough material, and it doesn't hurt if someone wants to skim it quickly, because they really are knowledgeable, they have that opportunity. But if they don't have that knowledge, and you go deep first, you've lost the reader at go, and that's not a good position. So err on the side of, making sure that you bring all your readers with you. Again, if the reader's talented, they can skim through that material. All right? If, for this writing exercise that I distributed in another week or two, you get stuck or you have questions about writing in general, let me know. I will say this, I do a lot of, I did circulate, if you want, you can critique me, I sent you 2 articles that I have recently written, one recently, one not so much. You can get a taste of my writing style, all right? But I do a lot of writing. I'm not saying I'm the best, but I can certainly share with you some of my thoughts on if anyone has something you want me to read, and just give you a quick critique on how I might do it differently. Happy to do it. Okay, so let's just talk for a few minutes about what we covered last class and what we're going to do tonight. If things fall into place, I know I say jokingly, you guys are not a donut crowd, because on Saturday, I think, of the 24 donuts, three were eaten, and the other 21 went to Professor Pachese's class.
And
I took back to my home to give kids.
Okay, so you did, all right, good.
No, and he went to Pachese's class, but there were only 2 or 3 eaten over there, and then it ultimately ended up at Dixie's place.
All right, so you guys are not a donut crowd, so we're gonna see if I do any better at around 7 o'clock. I have my phone on, because the person who's the delivery guy is gonna be locked out downstairs. So let's spend a few minutes talking, and if you see me pick up my cell phone, it's not because my wife is calling, it's because the delivery guy is waiting downstairs and is stuck, okay? All right, so we'll take a break around 7:05, whenever this delivery guy gets here. All right, so let's just refresh our memory on where we are and what we're doing. So we looked at the introduction and the allegiance we have to the system, and we know that's pretty amorphous. We looked at chapter 1, and we talked about sources of professional regulation and saw that the sources are multifold, and they come from state regulatory agencies, including the AICPA and the State Licensing Board, but they also come from the federal government. The federal government comes in the form of statutory rules, which we're going to look at tonight, in the form of Code Section 6694, and also Circular 230, which is found in Appendix A. All right. And by the way, Peter, if you can turn down the heat, I don't know if that worked last time, but it feels a little warm in here with all of us here.
What?
No, I was just saying it feels warm. Are you okay? All right. So we talked about chapter 1, and we talked about, the sources of and the Internal Revenue Code, State Licensing Board, and Circular 230. Those are things that, as practitioners, we have to be careful about. And if we're not careful, the code imposes monetary policies. Okay? The code imposes monetary policies. Circular 230, you have the risk of censor, you have the risk of monetary policy, monetary fines, and you have the risk of suspension. So the stakes are pretty high here, because if you get suspended from practice, not going to be good. All right. And we spoke a little bit about chapter 2. That's where we left off. And we commenced the discussion of tax return preparation and advice. And we talked about the fact that historically the penalties were light with respect to tax practice, and that it was only until about 10 years ago, 2008, that Congress coordinated the penalties between taxpayers and tax practitioners. That they're not exactly the same, but they're pretty consistent. So we got a little bit of a historical introduction about the tax penalties applicable to individuals, taxpayers, and then tax return preparers. And that brings us up to page 52. And I said, for exam purposes, that you really have to make sure you know what code section applied, or code sections plural, applied to taxpayers versus what code sections applied to tax return preparers. All right, so what we're going to do, and we started this exercise, is first look at taxpayer accuracy standards. Taxpayer accuracy standards. That begins on page 52. And this is very important to us as practitioners. Why is it so important? Because if taxpayers endure a tax penalty, there is a decent chance that they may say that we're at fault, meaning the practitioners at fault. So got to be very, very sensitive to this. All right. And keep in mind, there are instances where the taxpayer may be absolved, but the tax return preparer nevertheless bears a burden. So if you look at footnote 9, it says, the taxpayer may be able to rely on the preparer's advice and qualify for the good faith and reasonable cause exception, even though the preparer's advice was so clearly wrong that the preparer could be subject to a penalty for giving the advice. So the point I'm making is that one person, meaning the taxpayer, may be absolved, and the tax return preparer subject to a penalty, or vice versa, where the taxpayer may be subject to a penalty, but the tax return preparer did everything right and is absolved. So, the outcome here does not have to be symmetrical, where if one gets nailed, that both get nailed, or vice versa. It could be where one suffers a penalty and the other one does not. Okay, and what is the operative code section here, or code sections when it comes to taxpayers? And we said there are a few, but the most important for our purposes, and by the way, you guys may be in luck because I am getting a call from a number I don't know, so we may have an early break here, excuse me. Jay Solage. This is he. Perfect. You're downstairs? Okay, I think it's 161, 163. If you go to the back of the building, there's an overhang, and I will let you in, and I will tell my class that our break will begin in 1 minute, okay? It should say 161, 163, right, guys? And there's PNC, right? I'm looking at my class.
Yes.
Yeah, they're all nodding that the PNC is right downstairs. So if you go to the back of the building, I will look for you. And what kind of car or truck do you drive? Okay, I will be downstairs in a minute, and I will let you in, or I will look for you, okay? All right, take care. All right, so a little bit earlier, but that's okay. I'm gonna go down, if you guys stop in the restroom, and I will pick this up, and if you guys want, the vending machine is downstairs, vending machines. Let me